Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my How to Ninjutsu guide for ninjas in Final Fantasy XIV. This is not a dedicated ninja guide, it is only going to be covering the 7 ninjutsu skills they have, as well as Kassatsu, so that way ninjas know exactly when each ninjutsu is useful in which scenarios. I see a lot of mistakes being made in this department, so I figured I'd make a dedicated video for it. So for you beginner ninjas out there, ninjutsu is accessed by using 1, 2, or all 3 of the mudra abilities that the job learns. If executed in the correct order, the ninjutsu skill that you learn will change to represent the ability it will execute, one of 7 successful ninjutsus. Keep in mind that if you execute an improper command, it will instead become a rabbit medium ninjutsu, the failure one, basically a bunny on your head that mocks your failure. Also, if you use any other ability other than your mudras or your ninjutsu execution when doing the combo, it will instantly change your ninjutsu skill to a rabbit medium. The first successful ninjutsu we'll talk about is Fuma Shuriken, which is a 240 potency single target attack. This is your only ninjutsu that does physical damage, which does mean that it benefits from the 20% from your ninja poisons, 10% from dancing edge, and 10% from a hypercharge debuff if a machinist is in the area. This gives it a decent potency, but even then, you'll very rarely find yourself using it. It's mostly useful in scenarios when enemies take reduced or no magical damage, as it's physical damage and completely bypasses that restriction. Now, if you're someone who's playing with moderate to high latency, when hypercharge is up, you may consider replacing any Raiton with Fuma Shuriken. Even after the ninjutsu changes, making the mudras much cleaner to go through, it can still cause issues for players that are playing in regions that have no dedicated servers. The next ninjutsu we'll talk about is Raiton, which does 360 damage to a single target. Keep in mind that because the rest of them are magical, they do not benefit from things like ninja poisons, dancing edge, or hypercharge, though all magical ones do benefit from any sort of magical debuff, such as the magic hypercharge that can come from machinists, or Foe's Requiem, which can come from bards. Raiton is your go-to filler ninjutsu when only facing a single target. Keep in mind that it does excel under the use of Foe's Requiem and will do some decent bonus damage. The next ninjutsu is Suiton, which is a 180 potency magical attack. Now, while it doesn't do anything on its own, it does enable you to use sneak attack or trick attack without the use of stealth. Most of the time, you'll use this to apply your trick attack debuff for yourself and your party. That's a 10% damage increase for the next 10 seconds. You'll use this approximately once per minute, since that's how frequently trick attack becomes available. There are situations where you can use it for sneak attack instead, whether that be leveling or against enemies that actually don't have a rear for you to use trick attack on, such as the Kraken in Sestasha hard mode. The next ninjutsu is Huton, and it is easily one of your most important ones as soon as you can learn it. This gives you a buff that increases your attack speed by 15%. While that may not do any potency to the bad guys, it will make you hit a lot faster, which is very important to dealing a lot of damage. This is mandatory, and much of your job is going to focus on keeping this buff up. Prior to learning Armor Crush in the Heavensward areas, you will have to recast this every 3 uses of your ninjutsu, but after you learn Armor Crush, you can use that to maintain the buff instead. I recommend you get used to it by reapplying it by using Armor Crush every time the Huton buff falls under 24 seconds. Next up, we have our 2 AoE ninjutsus, and this is where I have a special service announcement for everybody here. The first AoE ninjutsu we'll talk about is Katon, which does 250 magical potency in an AoE. You'll want to use this if it's going to hit 2 or more targets. Keep in mind that on a single target, Raiton does 360 potency. On 2 targets, Katon will do 250 times 2 equals 500. I think you can see which is better here. The other AoE ninjutsu is Doton, which will deal damage over time to any enemy standing in the field that it drops when you execute the attack, as well as slowing their movement speed. Now, Doton deals 40 potency of damage every 3 seconds over the course of its 24-second duration, giving us a total of 320 potency. Similar to Katon, you'll want to use Doton as long as it will hit at least 2 targets. However, there is an additional rule to this. You only want to use Doton if the targets that are alive inside of it when you cast it will be alive or inside of the AoE for a minimum of 21 seconds. Do not use this if the enemies will die or be moved earlier than this. It is only stronger than Katon on the 7th and 8th tick. On the 6th tick, Doton is at a total of 240 potency, whereas Katon is still at its instant 250 potency. Now for that quick service announcement that I wanted to make, a lot of people are under the assumption that Doton can be stronger than Raiton under certain scenarios. This is only true on AoE targets. Raiton is 360 potency on a single target, Doton would be 320 potency on a single target. Under the effects of Kassatsu, that doesn't change much. Crits are automatically 1.5 times the amount of damage that is dealt by the attack. So So 1.5 times 360 and 1.5 times 320. I think you can math that one out yourself. The other common misconception is that Doton deals its damage every 1 second, which it does not. Ground AoEs deal damage every 3 seconds, which is how we got to the 320 potency total in the first place. So under no scenario is Doton better than a Raiton on a single target. Now keep in mind, if you screw up a ninjutsu, you're not going to get the Raiton, and you have no choice but to do a Doton or basically get a rabbit medium. That is still an acceptable means, but eventually with enough practice, that probably won't happen to you anymore. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, single target Dotons, try to avoid them. They're called STDs for a reason. That being said, the movement speed slow that Doton provides in PvP can be quite useful, even if it is only hitting one target. A well-placed Doton is great for slowing the movement speed of chasing enemies, so definitely consider dropping it in that scenario. The final ninjutsu that we have to talk about is Hyoton, where its potency is pretty much irrelevant. It has an added effect which will bind a target in place. Really, you'll probably never use it in PvE minus really clutch scenarios. It's mostly a PvP ninjutsu, used for isolating targets or peeling attackers off of your allies. Occasionally, it's useful for certain dungeon or raid mechanics, but just not all that common. So with the uses of each of the ninjutsus out of the way, let's clarify a few final things. Kassatsu is an ability that ninjas learn that causes their next ninjutsu to automatically crit. And it also completely resets the cooldown of your ninjutsu so that you can execute them immediately. Kassatsu you'll mostly use on either Raiton, Katon, or Doton, depending on the scenario. In a single target scenario, you'll usually use it with Raiton during the duration of a trick attack in order to deal a high potency Raiton crit with the added benefit of trick attack's damage increase. For Katon and Doton, you'll pretty much follow the same rules I listed earlier, but if you occasionally need to crit on those attacks, or you just don't have a use for Kassatsu otherwise, then it can also be good in that scenario as well. If you know you're going to burst down targets really quick and you're going to be hitting a lot of them, Kassatsu Katon does a ton of damage. If you know you're going to have to fight a lot of enemies for a fairly long period of time, Kassatsu Doton is a ton of potency. Still not more than Raiton. No STDs. The other question I very often get is how do you remember which mudras make which ninjutsu? Me personally, I don't try to memorize them by name, but instead by the order in which they appear in my hotbar. Let me explain. I have my 10 Chi and Jin as Shift 1 for 10, Shift 2 for Chi, and Shift 3 for Jin. The way I remember it is Suiton is Shift 1 2 3, Huton Shift 3 2 1. For Fuma Shuriken, it's any of them. For Raiton, it's Shift 1 2. For Katon, it's Shift 2 3. For Doton, it's Shift 1 3 2. And for Hyoton, it's Shift 1 3. Sorry, I don't use Hyoton very often, so I had to think about that one. Basically, line them up on your hotbar in such a way that you don't even remember their names. You just remember the muscle memory for the order in which you press them. And that's it for my How to Ninjutsu guide for ninjas in Final Fantasy XIV. If you have a friend who's thinking about picking up the ninja job and he's not too sure about the different scenarios he should use his ninjutsu in, I recommend linking him this video. Also, there are plenty of great resources out there for ninjas, and I do plan on making an updated guide, at least for the opener and some of the basic rules you can follow for ninjas, but I wanted this to be its own dedicated video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you guys stream side for Final Fantasy XIV. Until then, have a good night, take care.